Colleagues, we are getting the continuation of the third topic, and while we were talking about the technology, one of the most important and difficult for understanding that's actually technologies in time management, because time itself, that's the philosophical and physical correlation between the reality and the world which we perceive inside us. Here, if I were talking about the project, the time is important for the good and efficient implementation of the project stages. And the project schedules grow out on the basic document that initiate the project. That's project charter, includes start and the end dates, budget information. You remember we were talking about the starting and the end points, dates of the project implementation. It's important to state it clearly while you are making the project charter. Scope statement and work breakdown structure help define what will be done on the certain stages of the project implementation. And for sure the scope statement will also come to the certain time management activity, to the certain time procedure which you're supposed to follow to make it efficiency at your project implementation, and also to make the stages of not just the procedure itself, but also the correlation between other different phenomena. Activity definition, which also the part of the time managing at the project application, involves developing a more detailed work breakdown structure and supporting explanations to understand all the work to be done, so you can develop a realistic duration estimates of each and every stage of the project implementation. For sure, the work breakdown structure will help you also to follow and to evaluate the procedure of the implication of the projects. You remember several seconds ago we were talking about the risks. Also, it's important to identify during the work breakdown structure proclamation to connect the risk with those statements, connect the risk with those procedures which you have been implemented to the duration of the reality and implementation of the projects. For sure, such an estimation of the different time procedure, it's quite difficult in the sense that you're supposed to train it. That's why a lot of additional materials which is getting on to the time management, you will see that it's important to correlate the group activity. And such a correlation is also the psychological phenomenon, which of course underline the philosophical importance of the understanding of the time. The psychological training procedure which help to unite and qualify the team members and correlate it with the interests of the stakeholders which you will work on, and of course the product, the services which you will provide as the result of your project implementation will have also the part of the efficiency while you are following the time procedure, the realistic breakdown structure which you have been formed. That's why the activity sequencing. Activity sequencing involves reviewing activities and determine dependencies between the different stages, between different parts of the efficient implication of the project itself. Activity sequencing, it's also the correlation between different stages of the project implementation. And while you have such a sequencing of the time, you also will see that it's important to follow it straightly, without the objectives. And definitely the time understanding of different nations, you also understand this, is also the problem while you are making the international projects, while you are making the projects which implement the representatives of different ethnic communities. So that's why the sequencing of the time, it's important to correlate between each of the parts of the projects. Its mandatory dependencies of the sequencing inherent in the nature of the work and the hard logic which you are using while you are implementing the project. Activity sequencing while you are discretionary dependencies which we will face on the different levels of the implementation with the different sources of the implementation procedure defined by the project team, and it includes soft logic of its unity. Soft logic in the following of the time management and the following of the different dependencies which have been identified. And for sure external dependencies of the time, which involves relationship between project and between project activity. Such relationships also a vision of the transforming of the policy, and such an external dependencies also the problem of the correlation of the time schedule of yours as the project team implementers and the stakeholders which you are working, and those responsibility of the social environment on which you have been discussed. I have mentioned to you that the project team must determine dependencies in order to use critical path analysis. Critical path analysis as the strategy of the development of the project implementation. The path which will come to the efficient response over the risks, over the budgeting, and over the time schedule of the project itself. While you are making the path analysis, you're supposed to follow the idea that the paths can be different, but it's supposed to have the common. What it's supposed to have in common, that's the goal, strategy, achievements which have been implemented to the project activity, achievements which have been implemented to the social activity vision, and for sure to make the time as the critical path analysis approach. It's quite difficult, and in the same way it's important. The importance of the time management have been underlined by the theory and by the practice itself. You will also face it. Nobody will teach you unless you have tried it by your own. So that's why you're supposed to try to follow different strategies of the time management which have been presented at the additional materials. And for sure, while you are making the strategy of the time, you're supposed to understand the reality, you're supposed to understand the individual procedure of understanding of the time, because it's not so universal as we can think about it. Project network diagrams are the preferred technique for showing activity sequencing and for showing the usage of different spheres, usage of different sectors of your project management, of your project implementation. While you are making the project network diagrams, also you will see how the certain part of your project implementation, when it's supposed to be used and for which purpose, and how it will be analyzed in the future also will come as the result of not just the project risk analysis, but also by the assessment which you will do for the project implementation. A project network diagram is a schematic display of the logical relationships among or sequencing of project activities. The relationships which will be conducted, which is supposed to be conducted with the response of the requests, of the sources available for the project implementation, and of course the time on which we will use it. Definitely the sequencing of the project activity is important task for the coordinator, is important task for the person who will make the time managing of the group activity. While you are training, as I have mentioned, while you are psychologically identifying the vision of the time in your group, you're supposed to make the priorities also sequencing and connected to the time procedure managing. Definitely such a statement as the logical relationships among these parts of the project implementation will help you to identify the strategy line at the time management, and such a strategy line will later on will be useful for the further description of the product itself, while you are having to analyze and assess how it was implemented to the social reality. Also, the technology which you can use except the project network diagram here is activity on arrow project network diagrams as the part of the diagrams which can be used. First of all, activities are represented by arrows, by the certain starting point. You remember the starting dates, the starting time, and the procedure of the arrows which actually performing, which actually getting the visualizing of the performing, and final point of the arrow, which will be the final date, the final time of the certain procedure of the implementation of the projects. While at this final point you will, after that, you will assess. So this means the arrow will be changed, so the time point will be the same, but the arrow will be changed for the statement of the assessment. Nodes or cycles are the starting and the ending points of the activities that you're supposed to underline for you and clearly describe it, at the strategy plan, at this activity on arrow project diagrams. As the systematic approach, these all nodes or cycles which you are using as the starting or ending points, they're supposed to be correlated and transformed to another table. It can only show finish to start dependencies of the certain part of the project, a certain part of the procedure which have been implemented to the strategic plan of the implementation. And definitely the finish to start dependencies also can help you to identify which sources can be used, except the time of course, for the efficient implementation of the procedure. Let's give an example. Let's make an example by your own while you are getting the activity on arrow project network diagrams. Find all of the activities and pick up the start at a node 1 of one of the activities. Draw the finish nodes and draw arrows between node 1 and finish nodes. Then underline, put A, B, C, activity, letter or name and duration estimate on the associated arrow while you are describing such an arrow. You can put also the number of an arrow and then make the description of it. All this training which we're gonna have during the practical classes will be correlated with the activity on arrow time management strategy, because each of the parts of the project is supposed to be related with the source time connection to source time description activity, and that's why it's important to use it during each of the evaluation. After even the evaluation has been done, you can fix it, you can make changes of such nodes, and then the duration can be estimatedly associated with the arrow. Second step is continuing drawing the network diagram, working from left to right to make the diapason of the implementation time, diapason of the implementation of the usage sources. Look for bursts and merges which have appeared at this drawing of the network diagram, and bursts occurs when a single node is followed by 2 or more activities. As I have mentioned to you, it can be the starting point, then evaluation, the assessment criteria, and then post evaluation activity with the main idea to implement further efficient product for the stakeholders, for the social environment on which you are working on. A merge occurs when two or more nodes precede a single node. With the same time position. So that is why you are picking the merge which occurs on the certain time point, which correlate with between each of the terms, between each of the activity which have been done. It's important to correlate it with each other. So that's why bursts and merge will actually help you to make such a correlation, but started from the left up to right as the strategy. And the third point, while you are making the arrow description, arrow diagram, let's continue drawing the project network diagram until all activities are included on the diagram that have dependencies, and all of them will help you to identify such dependencies. Why it's important for the time? Because you are using here actually the time for the preparation of the project, and also you will show the time of the estimating calculated beforehand, and also then while you will make an assessment, you will come back to this drawing, you will come back to this diagram, and it will help you to understand where were mistakes in the planning procedure, where were mistakes in the certain activities which have been planned, and how it have not been reached for the certain time implemented. Finally, as a rule of thumb, all arrowheads should face toward the right, and no arrows should cross on an AOA network diagram. And for sure, such a statement, once more, will help you to understand the strategy of the development, to understand the strategy of the diagram itself. Also, the technologies which can be important for the understanding of the time management, because not all of us have been trained beforehand. Right now, we're supposed to train in during the practical classes, while you're making the understanding of the time management of your project. That's a precedence diagramming method. Is a visual representation technique that depicts the activities involved in the project. It's a method of constructing a project schedule network diagram that uses boxes nodes to represent activities and connects them with arrows that show the dependencies. Such a precedence diagramming method also will help you to make a visualizing context of the certain position of the project. It's not stated as an arrow method from left to right. It can appear also by ideas, by the connection between boxes, by the connection between certain elements of the project itself. Precedence diagramming method allows to visualize management activities and represented by boxes, and arrows will show the relationships between such activities. And definitely the arrows will also implement not just the time, but the strategy of the usage of these resources. Definitely the time which you will spend on the precedence diagramming method preparing and drawing will be then used properly during the procedure of the implementation of the project. It's better at showing different types of dependencies and interdependencies than the arrow method. Precedence diagramming method, as I have mentioned to you, will explain different parts of the project and the interconnection between each other, and formatted the beyond scheme of the project activity. The schedule development uses results of the other time management process to determine the start and the end date of the project and its activity. Before, the arrow systematic approach will show you just the end and the start and the end point, but here at the schedule development we will also make the procedure. We will make the procedure of the reaching certain goals to be realistic, to be informed, and to be formulated more clearly at the identification of the project implementation. Ultimate goal of the schedule development time procedure is to create a realistic project schedule that provides a basis for monitoring project progresses, for the time dimension of the project and the usage of the resources. It's also important tools and techniques which include Gantt charts, the PERT analysis. We're gonna have an examples of this Gantt charts and PERT analysis during the practical classes and additional materials, critical path analysis and critical chain scheduling. I can explain to you briefly the Gantt charts, and it's provide a standard format for displaying project schedule information by listing project activities and their corresponding start and finish dates in a calendar format. And also there are different types of the Gantt charts, and which can provide only one procedure, which can implement the interconnection between different procedures, the same as the box idea. But it's, as far as it have been presented at the calendar format, it also will help you to understand the time changing which can be used during the implementation procedure. The Gantt chart's importance it's also lay on the systematic approach of the constructing material, on the systematic approach of the constructing of such a schedule. Importance also lay under the description, on the underline of the milestones, which are significant events on the project that normally have zero duration, and project team can follow the SMART criteria effect in developing milestones. You remember SMART criteria, which we had identified after our first topic during the practical classes, and it's supposed to be correlated with the milestones which you have been implemented to the Gantt chart. Critical path method is a project network analysis technique used to predict total project duration. For sure, here at the critical path method, you're supposed to be well trained in the time management, because to foresee, to predict the total project duration, it's supposed to be done very clearly, and it's supposed to be done with specific ways. A critical path for a project is the series of activities that determines the earliest time by which the project can be completed, and also this will help you to identify, to clarify your group team members, to use all the sources to reach that date and reach that date of the implementation of the project with the proper results. What kind of conclusion we can have up to the moment for the time management procedure? All of these techniques supposed to be trained on, and that's important. Time management goal is to understand all the work to be done and develop realistic duration estimates. And here you're supposed to train at this realistic presentation of the estimating procedure. The second thing, second conclusion, that the project team must determine dependencies in order to use critical path analysis. Such dependencies will help you to understand the correlations between different paths, to understand the correlation between the project team and the stakeholders, and also the social environment itself. And for sure, one of the main methodology, one of the main technique which we can use during the time management procedure for the project implementation, that's the Gantt chart, which provide a standard format for displaying project schedule information in the calendar format, and its correlation with different programs, with different IT programs which can be used during the project implementation. So thank you, and see you at the practical classes with the more precise using of the time management technologies.